Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, September 11th, 1948. 25-year-old psychologist Vera Caldwell sat in her office at Children's Medical Center No. 4 and flipped through the medical chart of another child. 7-year-old boy named Curtis Lattimore had been referred to the neurologist with complaints of bedwetting, facial tics, and episodes of panic attacks. In the quote, _0___ section, the doctor had written, quote, _1___. Vera was already closing the folder when her eyes caught a line at the bottom of the page. Quote, _2___. She'd seen that name 5 times in the past 2 hours. 5 different children. 5 identical diagnoses. 1 teacher. Vera opened her desk drawer and pulled out a folder she'd been keeping for the past 3 months, unofficially, on her own initiative. It contained copies of excerpts from medical records of children who had passed through the pediatric neurology department over the past 5 years. She'd started collecting this data by accident when she noticed a strange pattern. Every school year, a group of first graders came to the clinic with nearly identical psychosomatic disorders. Children complained of headaches, insomnia, loss of appetite, obsessive fears. They wet their beds until age 9 or 10. They developed tics, stuttering, anxiety disorders. And all of them, absolutely all of them, were taught by one elementary school teacher. Opal Thornbury Buckwald. 62 years old, 38 years of teaching experience. Distinguished Educator of Pennsylvania. Recipient of the Meritorious Service Medal. 3-time honoree of commendations from the State Department of Education. Her portrait hung in the teacher's lounge on the Wall of Honor. The local newspaper wrote about her as quote, _3___. Parents dreamed of getting their children into her class because Buckwald had a reputation for iron discipline and high academic achievement. After her lessons, children read, wrote, and calculated better than anyone else in their grade. The school administration held her up as an example to younger teachers. Vera opened the first chart in her folder. Dorothy Holcomb, born 1940. Entered first grade in 1947. Taught by Buckwald. In the medical record, an entry from November 1947. Quote, 4. Next entry, March 1948. Quote, 5. The girl was withdrawn from school. Vera remembered this family. The father worked as a machinist at a steel mill. The mother was a cook at a cafeteria. An ordinary American family, no trauma or upheaval at home. Second chart. Leonard Timmons, born 1941. First grade, 1948. Buckwald. Entry from September 1948. Quote 6. An 8-year-old boy had tried to jump out of a second-floor window just 2 weeks ago. He was saved, placed in a children's psychiatric ward. His parents were already planning to transfer him to another school. Third chart. Phyllis Warrender, born 1941. First grade, 1948. Buckwald. Entry from early September 1948. Selective mutism. Child does not speak in the presence of unfamiliar adults. Excessive anxiety. Nail biting to the point of bleeding. Vera flipped through another 17 charts. All the stories were carbon copies. Children entered first grade under Buckwald healthy, cheerful, normal. By the end of the first marking period, the first symptoms appeared. Poor sleep, loss of appetite, fear of school. By Christmas, full-blown psychosomatic disorders developed. By the end of the school year, some children ended up in psychiatric hospitals. Some were transferred to homeschooling. Some simply endured and broke internally, but continued going to school because their parents didn't understand what was happening and demanded they, quote, 8, quote, and, quote, 9, quote. Vera closed the folder and looked out the window. Outside the glass, autumn rain drizzled. In the clinic courtyard stood a playground. Swings, sandbox, slide. 3 girls in matching school dresses were jumping rope. They were laughing. They were happy. And somewhere at Washington Elementary number 28 sat 25 first graders who in 2 months would stop laughing. Vera stood from her desk and walked to the office of the head of the pediatric department. Constance Murphy, a 50-year-old woman with a tired face and kind eyes, rose to greet her. Vera laid the folder on the desk. Dr. Murphy opened the folder, scanned the first pages. Her face went pale. Vera replied. Dr. Murphy closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. Quote, 18. Quote, 19. Quote, 20. Quote, 21. Vera shook her head. Quote, 22. Quote. Dr. Murphy remained silent for a long time, staring out the window. Then she sighed heavily. Vera interrupted. Dr. Murphy covered her face with her hands. Vera left the clinic and headed to the bus stop. She decided to start with those who had already grown up, former Buckwald students who were now 18 to 25 years old. They were no longer children. They could speak freely. First on her list was Eugene Trask, born 1928. He'd studied under Buckwald from 1935 to 1939. Now he was 20 years old, working as a machinist at the Westinghouse plant. Vera found his address in old medical records she'd requested from the archives. The family lived in the Bloomfield neighborhood. She arrived at a brick row house in the evening, climbed to the second floor, knocked on apartment 47. A young man with a tired face opened the door, wearing work clothes. The young man frowned. Eugene's face changed, his jaw clenched, his eyes darkened. He stepped back, as if she'd struck him. Eugene stood silent in the doorway for a long time. Then he opened the door wider. They sat in a small kitchen. Eugene's mother, a middle-aged woman in an apron, brought tea and left them alone. Eugene sat across from Vera, staring at his cup. I haven't thought about her in years, he said quietly. I tried to forget. But sometimes I wake up at night and I'm back there, in that classroom, and she's standing over me, and I can't breathe. Tell me what happened. Eugene was silent for a long time. Then he began to speak. First grade, 1935. I was 7. My parents were so happy I got into her class. Everyone said she was the best teacher in the school, that her students always became something in life. My father worked at Jones and Laughlin Steel. My mother was a seamstress. They wanted me to have a good education, to have opportunities they didn't have. The first day of school, Mrs. Buckwald lined us up in the classroom. 28 kids. She looked at us like we were raw recruits at boot camp. Not children, not people, just material that needed to be shaped. She said, "In my classroom there are rules. You will obey them. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not move without permission. You will not think thoughts I haven't given you. If you disobey, you will be punished." I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. Eugene took a sip of tea. His hand trembled. She had a system. If you made a mistake in writing, you had to stand in the corner facing the wall for an hour. If you couldn't solve an arithmetic problem, you stood on one leg until you figured it out. Some kids stood for 2 hours. Their legs went numb. They fell. She made them get up and stand again. She said, "Pain teaches discipline." If you whispered to another student, she put tape over your mouth. Actual adhesive tape. You sat the whole lesson unable to speak, barely able to breathe through your nose. If you cried, she locked you in the supply closet, in the dark, for an hour, sometimes 2. You sat there among the mops and buckets in complete darkness and heard your classmates' voices through the door. She said, "Tears are weakness. I'm curing you of weakness." But the worst thing wasn't the physical punishment. It was the humiliation. She had a special failure chair, a small wooden chair that stood in front of the class. If you got a D on a test, you had to sit in that chair during recess while everyone else went outside. You sat there alone, and everyone who passed by saw you. The other kids laughed. They pointed. They called you stupid. And Mrs. Buckwald stood nearby and said, "Look at Eugene. He's a failure. Do you want to be like Eugene?" I started wetting the bed. I was 7 years old. I'd been dry since I was 4, but suddenly I started wetting the bed again. Every night. My mother was angry. She didn't understand what was wrong with me. She punished me, made me wash my own sheets, wouldn't let me go out to play. She thought I was doing it on purpose. But I couldn't help it. I was so scared all the time that my body just gave up. I developed a stutter. I couldn't say my name without stumbling over the letters. Mrs. Buckwald mocked me in front of the class. She made me stand and repeat after her. "My name is Eugene," over and over. "My name is Eugene." And I couldn't do it. I stuttered. My name. And the kids laughed. And she said, "See, this is what happens when you're weak. You can't even speak properly." I started pulling my hair out, just pulling it. At night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd lie in bed and pull out my hair strand by strand. It hurt, but the pain was controllable. It was pain I could control, not like the fear. One day, I remember it was February 1936. I couldn't solve an arithmetic problem. 5 plus 7. Simple addition. But I was so scared I couldn't think. My brain just froze. Mrs. Buckwald made me stand at the blackboard for 3 hours. 3 hours. I missed lunch. I missed recess. I stood there, and my legs hurt so much I thought I'd collapse. Finally, another student whispered the answer to me. I said, 12. Mrs. Buckwald heard the whisper. She knew I hadn't figured it out myself. She made both of us stand in opposite corners until the end of the day. And she said, "This is what happens to cheaters." I tried to tell my parents. I said I didn't want to go to school. I cried, I begged, but they didn't believe me. They said I was being dramatic, that Mrs. Buckwald was a respected teacher, that thousands of children had studied under her and turned out fine, that I needed to toughen up. "Life is hard, Eugene," my father said. "You need to learn to endure." By the end of first grade, I'd lost 12 pounds. I had bald patches from pulling my hair. I stuttered so badly I could barely speak. I wet the bed every night. I had nightmares. I dreamed Mrs. Buckwald was chasing me with a ruler, and I couldn't run. My legs wouldn't move, and she caught me and hit me and hit me and hit me. Second grade was with a different teacher, a kind woman, Mrs. Patterson. She was gentle. She praised us. She never punished us. But I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a trick. I thought any moment she'd turn into Mrs. Buckwald. It took me 2 years to start trusting her. 2 years to stop flinching every time she called my name. The stuttering went away when I was 12. The bedwetting stopped at 9. The hair pulling, I still do it sometimes. When I'm stressed, I catch myself pulling at my hair, and I have to force myself to stop. Eugene looked at Vera. His eyes were wet. I'm 20 years old. It's been 13 years since first grade. But I still dream about her. I still wake up in a cold sweat. I still hear her voice. "Eugene Trask, you are a failure." And part of me still believes it. Vera wrote everything down. Then she asked, "Did any of your classmates have similar experiences?" "All of them," Eugene said simply. "Every single one. Some worse than me. There was a girl, Hazel Pendergast. She was so scared of Mrs. Buckwald she stopped talking. Just stopped. For 2 years. She didn't speak at all. Not at home, not at school. Her parents took her to doctors. They thought she was deaf. But she could hear fine. She just couldn't speak. The fear choked her. There was a boy, Vincent Scragg. He started hitting his head against the wall, just banging his head, over and over. He gave himself concussions. He's in a state hospital now, has been for years. There was another girl, Sally Parsons. Eugene's voice dropped. __quote _61 ___. Eugene's hands were shaking. He clasped them together to steady them. You want to know what Mrs. Buckwald did to us? She broke us. She took normal, healthy children and systematically destroyed their sense of self-worth. She made us believe we were worthless, stupid, failures. And that belief, it doesn't just go away. It stays with you, forever. Vera thanked Eugene and left. She walked to the bus stop in the rain, her notebook clutched to her chest. She had 7 more interviews scheduled for the week. Over the next month, Vera interviewed 38 former Buckwald students, people who'd been in her classes anywhere from 5 to 20 years ago. She pulled records from hospital archives, tracked down families who'd moved away, spent evenings in libraries searching through old school registries. Each interview revealed new layers of the same pattern. A respected, decorated teacher who ruled her classroom through fear, humiliation, and psychological torture. The second interview was with Margaret Hollis, now 24, who'd been in Buckwald's class in 1931. Margaret worked as a telephone operator and lived with her parents in the South Side. She'd never married, never moved out, struggled to hold eye contact when speaking. __quote _63 ___, Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. 64 Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. I never learned to read properly. Even now, when I see words on a page, I panic. My brain just freezes. The doctors said there's nothing wrong with my eyes or my brain. It's psychological. But knowing that doesn't help. I can't read a book. Can't read a menu in a restaurant. I'm 24 years old and I can barely function. The third interview was with Robert Kelso, age 29, a veteran who'd served in the Pacific during the war. He'd been in Buckwald's class in 1926. He met Vera in a bar near the docks, wouldn't agree to meet anywhere else. I've seen combat, Robert said, staring into his whiskey glass. Guadalcanal, Okinawa. I've seen men blown apart, watched my friends die. But you want to know what I still have nightmares about? First grade. Mrs. Buckwald had a ruler, wooden, 12 inches long. She'd slap it on the desk when she wanted silence. The sound was like a gunshot. Even now, when I hear a loud bang, I'm back in that classroom, 7 years old, terrified. If you fidgeted, and what 7-year-old doesn't fidget? She'd make you hold your arms straight out to the sides, like a cross. You'd stand there, arms out, until they started shaking, then burning. Then you couldn't hold them up anymore and they'd drop and she'd scream at you for being weak and make you raise them again. Some kids stood like that for an hour. I saw kids pass out. There was this boy, Jimmy Torrance, small kid, sweet kid, couldn't sit still. Now we'd probably say he had ADHD or something. But back then, Mrs. Buckwald just said he was defiant. She made him stand in the corner so much that his mother finally pulled him out of school. I heard he never went back, never learned to read or write. Last I heard, he was living on the streets. Robert drained his whiskey, signaled for another. The war was hell, but I knew who the enemy was. I knew why I was fighting. In Mrs. Buckwald's classroom, I was just a kid. I didn't understand what I'd done wrong, why she hated us so much. And that not knowing, that was worse than anything the Japanese threw at me. Interview after interview, the pattern held. Children forced to stand for hours as punishment. Children locked in dark closets. Children publicly shamed, mocked, degraded. Children who developed anxiety disorders, depression, psychosomatic illnesses. Children whose lives were permanently scarred. Vera documented it all. The physical punishments, the psychological warfare, the systematic destruction of children's self-worth. She took detailed notes, recorded dates and times, collected corroborating evidence. Mabel Collingsworth, now 32, told Vera about the quote 74, a dunce cap Mrs. Buckwald made failing students wear during class. Quote 75, Mabel said. Quote 76. Harold Brink, now 28, described the quote 77 Florence Needham, now 26, talked about the quote 79 punishment. Quote, the stories went on and on, each one a small horror, each one a child's life damaged, twisted, broken. But what shocked Vera most was the parents' reactions. When she contacted families to request interviews, many were defensive. They didn't want to believe their respected teacher had harmed their children. Some accused Vera of lying, of making trouble, of trying to destroy a good woman's reputation. One mother said. A father insisted. They didn't see, or didn't want to see, the cost. The nightmares, the bedwetting, the anxiety, the depression, the years of therapy. They saw only the good grades, the academic achievement, the quote 85 and they convinced themselves the price was worth it. Vera compiled her findings into a comprehensive report, 38 interviews spanning students from 1933 to 1948. Consistent accounts of systematic psychological abuse, patterns of punishment that would be considered torture if applied to prisoners of war. Long-term psychological damage documented in medical records. She even found records showing that of the roughly 400 students Buckwald had taught over the years, at least 7 had taken their own lives, all of them young people who'd never recovered from the trauma of her classroom. She submitted the report to Dr. Murphy, who read it with growing horror. This is... my God, Vera. This is monstrous. I know. What do you want to do? I want to go to the school board. I want them to investigate. I want her removed from the classroom before she harms any more children. Dr. Murphy was quiet for a long time. Then she said, you understand this will be a fight. She's protected. She has allies. The school principal loves her. The superintendent gave her an award last year. Parents request her specifically. You'll be going up against the entire system. I know. And if you fail, if they don't believe you, your career will be over. They'll call you a troublemaker, a hysteric. They'll say you're making false accusations against a distinguished educator. Vera looked Dr. Murphy in the eye. If I do nothing, children will continue to suffer. I can't live with that. Dr. Murphy nodded slowly. Then I'll support you, officially. We'll do this together. The school board meeting was held on November 15, 1948. The boardroom was packed. Vera and Dr. Murphy sat at a table facing 5 board members. Behind them, in the gallery, sat parents, teachers, and curious community members. Mrs. Opal Buckwald sat in the front row, her face stern and dignified, her hands folded in her lap. Vera presented her findings. She showed the medical records, read excerpts from interviews, explained the pattern of psychological abuse spanning 15 years. She spoke calmly, methodically, laying out the evidence piece by piece. When she finished, the board chairman, a stern man named Rutherford Hayes Morrison, looked at her over his reading glasses. Dr. Caldwell, you're making serious allegations against one of our most respected educators. Mrs. Buckwald has served this community for nearly 4 decades. She's taught hundreds of children. Are you telling us she's been abusing them all this time? I'm telling you that her teaching methods cause serious psychological harm to a significant percentage of her students. The evidence is clear. Evidence? Morrison scoffed. You've presented medical records and secondhand accounts. Children complaining about strict discipline. Where's the evidence of abuse? The pattern. Correlation is not causation, Dr. Caldwell. Some children are simply more sensitive than others. They can't handle structure and discipline. That doesn't mean the teacher is at fault. Vera felt her frustration rising. Sir, these children developed severe psychiatric disorders. selective mutism, attempts at self-harm, years of therapy. This isn't sensitivity. This is trauma. Morrison waved his hand dismissively. Children are resilient. A little strictness never hurt anyone. In my day, teachers used paddles. We turned out fine. Did you? Vera asked quietly. Morrison's face reddened. The room went silent. Morrison stared at Vera, his jaw working. Then Mrs. Buckwald stood up. She was a tall woman, thin and severe, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a dark blue suit and sensible shoes. Her face was lined but strong. Her eyes were cold. Quote 106, she asked. Morrison nodded. Mrs. Buckwald turned to address the room. Quote 107, she said. Her voice was clear, carrying. Quote 108. Quote. Quote 109. Quote. Quote 110. Quote. Quote 111. Quote. She sat down. Several people in the gallery applauded. Vera felt sick. She wanted to scream, to shake these people, to make them see. But she forced herself to remain calm. Quote 112. Quote, she said. Quote 113. Quote. Mrs. Buckwald's expression didn't change. Mrs. Buckwald's lips curved in a slight smile. They were defective to begin with. Vera turned back to the board. Gentlemen, you've heard her own words. She views children as defective if they cannot withstand her methods. She shows no remorse, no awareness that her actions cause harm. I am asking you to remove her from the classroom, for the safety of current and future students. Morrison exchanged glances with the other board members. They conferred in whispers. Then Morrison cleared his throat. Dr. Caldwell, we appreciate your concerns. However, we see no evidence of wrongdoing that would warrant termination. Mrs. Buckwald's methods may be old-fashioned, but they are effective. Her students consistently score highest on standardized tests. Parents specifically request her class. Without concrete evidence of physical abuse or criminal conduct, we cannot justify removing a distinguished educator from her position. The psychological abuse is a matter of interpretation. What you call abuse, we call discipline. The board votes to dismiss these allegations. Mrs. Buckwald will continue teaching. The gavel fell. Vera walked out of the boardroom in a daze. Dr. Murphy followed her. I'm sorry, Vera. I truly am. Vera didn't respond. She couldn't. She felt hollow. She'd failed. Mrs. Buckwald would continue teaching. More children would suffer, and there was nothing Vera could do about it. She went home that night and sat in her small apartment, staring at the wall. She thought about Eugene Trask, still having nightmares at 20. About Sally Parsons, who'd ended her own life 4 years ago at 16. About the 25 first graders currently in Mrs. Buckwald's classroom, who in a few months would start wetting their beds, pulling out their hair, developing tics. She thought about giving up, about accepting defeat, about moving on with her life and trying to forget. But she couldn't. The next morning, Vera went to the Pittsburgh Tribune. She met with a reporter named Wallace Hendricks, a middle-aged man with skeptical eyes and a notepad always in hand. I have a story for you, Vera said, about a teacher who's been psychologically abusing children for decades, and a school board that refuses to stop her. Hendricks listened as Vera laid out the evidence. The medical records, the interviews, the pattern of harm spanning 15 years. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. This is a hell of a story, he said finally. But it's also a hell of a risk. If we publish this and can't prove it, we'll be sued for libel. Mrs. Buckwald has a reputation to protect. I can prove it, Vera said. I have 38 witnesses. I have medical documentation. I have a pattern spanning over a decade. Witnesses can be discredited. Medical records can be explained away. You need something undeniable. Like what? Like her own students. Current students, on the record, describing what she does. Vera's heart sank. Vera spent the next 2 weeks trying. She contacted parents of current first graders. Most slammed doors in her face. Those who listened were afraid. Afraid of retaliation. Afraid of their children being labeled troublemakers. Afraid of rocking the boat. She contacted teachers at Washington Elementary. Most refused to talk. The few who did spoke in whispers, off the record. Yes, they'd heard things, seen things, but they couldn't say anything officially. They had families to support, jobs to keep. Mrs. Buckwald had allies in the administration. Speaking out would be career suicide. Vera was about to give up when she received a phone call. Quote 136. They met at a diner near the steel mills. Iris Pemberton was a thin, nervous woman in her early 30s. She had dark circles under her eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "My daughter Nadine is in Mrs. Buckwald's class," Iris said. "First grade. She started in September. It's now December. She's not the same child." "Tell me what you've noticed." "She stopped eating. She was always a good eater, loved my meatloaf, would ask for seconds. Now she picks at her food, won't finish a meal. She's lost weight. Her clothes are hanging off her. She started wetting the bed. She hasn't done that since she was 3. Now it's every night, sometimes twice a night. She's so ashamed. She cries when it happens, begs me not to tell anyone. She has nightmares. She wakes up screaming. I ask her what's wrong, she won't say. She just cries and won't let me leave the room. And she does this thing now, this strange thing. She counts. Everything. She counts her steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counts her bites of food. She counts her breaths. I asked her why. She said Mrs. Buckwald makes them count. Count their mistakes. Count their failures. You've made 17 mistakes today, Nadine. Count them. Remember them. Failures must be counted. Iris's voice broke. Iris looked at Vera with desperate eyes. Vera reached across the table and took Iris's hand. I need you to do something very brave. I need you to let me interview Nadine. On the record. For a newspaper article. It's the only way to force the school board to act. Iris's face went pale. Quote 151, quote 152. Iris was silent for a long time. Then she nodded. Quote 153. The interview took place in Vera's office at the clinic. Nadine Pemberton was a small, thin girl with enormous brown eyes and hair that had been chopped unevenly. Apparently, her mother hadn't been able to fully repair the damage Nadine had done with the scissors. She sat in a chair too big for her, legs dangling, hands folded in her lap. Wallace Hendricks, the reporter, sat nearby with his notepad. Iris Pemberton sat next to her daughter, holding her hand. Vera spoke gently. Underscore, quote, 154, Nadine nodded, but said nothing. Underscore, quote, 155, Nadine's small voice was barely audible. She's scary. What makes her scary? She yells. A lot. Really loud. It hurts my ears. What does she yell about? Mistakes. If you make a mistake, she yells. If you don't understand, she yells. If you're too slow, she yells. What happens when you make a mistake? Nadine's eyes filled with tears. Underscore, quote, 162, quote, 163, quote, 164, quote, 165, quote, 166, quote, 167, quote, 168, quote. Nadine was, quote, 167, 168. Nadine was crying now, tears streaming down her face. 169, 170, 171. Iris was crying too now, holding her daughter. Vera's throat was tight. She forced herself to continue. Nadine, are you the only one this happens to? Or does it happen to other children too? Everyone, Nadine whispered. It happens to everyone. We're all scared. Nobody wants to go to school. Timmy throws up every morning before school. Betty pulls her hair out. Raymond hits himself in the head. We're all scared all the time. Wallace Hendricks was writing furiously, his face grim. When the interview was over, Vera walked Iris and Nadine to the door. Iris turned back. Will this help? She asked. I hope so, Vera said. I truly hope so. The article ran on the front page of the Pittsburgh Tribune on December 20th, 1948. The headline read, Distinguished Teacher or Child Abuser? Parents demand investigation into educators' methods. The article was damning. Wallace Hendricks had done his job well. He'd interviewed not just Nadine, but 5 other current students whose parents had come forward after hearing about Vera's investigation. He'd obtained school records showing disciplinary complaints that had been ignored. He'd talked to former students who corroborated the pattern of abuse. He'd included medical documentation of the psychological harm. And he'd included Mrs. Buckwald's own words from the school board meeting. Quote 179 __. The response was immediate and explosive. The newspaper's phone lines were flooded. Parents called, outraged. Some supported Mrs. Buckwald. She's a fine teacher. This is just sensitive children complaining about discipline. Others were horrified. I had no idea. My son was in her class 3 years ago. He had nightmares for years. I thought it was just him. The school board was forced to reconvene. The pressure was too great to ignore. This time, when Vera presented her evidence, the board listened. The public outcry was too loud. The newspaper coverage was too damaging. They couldn't sweep it under the rug. On January 15, 1949, the Pittsburgh School Board announced that Mrs. Opal Thornbury Buckwald would be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, more than 200 former students and parents came forward with testimonies. The pattern was undeniable. Decades of systematic psychological abuse, hundreds of children harmed. The investigative committee interviewed teachers who'd worked alongside Buckwald. Most were too frightened to speak on the record, but a few, nearing retirement, finally broke their silence. Ethel Morrison, a 4th-grade teacher who'd worked at Washington Elementary since 1935, testified. Ethel continued, her voice breaking. Thomas Wardle, who'd been school principal from 1930 to 1945, was called to testify. By then retired and living in Florida, he was flown back to Pittsburgh for questioning. Mrs. Buckwald was the best teacher I ever supervised, he said stubbornly. Her students had the highest reading scores in the district, the highest math scores. Parents specifically requested their children be placed in her class. Did you ever investigate complaints about her methods? The committee chair asked. There were no formal complaints. No formal complaints? Or no complaints you chose to act on? Wardell shifted in his seat. Parents sometimes expressed concerns. I explained that discipline was necessary for learning, that children needed structure. Most parents understood. And the ones who didn't understand? They could transfer their children to other schools if they wished. The committee uncovered documents showing that over the years, at least 47 families had requested their children be transferred out of Buckwald's class. Most requests were denied. The official reason was always quote 193 or quote 194 . The real reason, as internal memos revealed, was that the administration didn't want to acknowledge there was a problem. One memo, dated March 1940, from Wardell to the superintendent read, Mrs. Buckwald's methods may seem harsh to modern sensibilities, but they produce results. In these difficult times, the Depression, we need citizens who are tough, disciplined, and resilient. Mrs. Buckwald is training children for the real world, not coddling them. Another memo from 1943 responded to a mother's complaint. __quote _196 Timothy, the committee discovered, had been 7 years old. He'd developed such severe anxiety in Buckwald's class that he'd stopped speaking entirely. His mother, a widow whose husband had died at Pearl Harbor, couldn't afford to quit her job to homeschool him. Timothy had remained in Buckwald's class. By 3rd grade, he was functionally illiterate. By age 16, he'd dropped out of school. Now, at 22, he worked as a day laborer and could barely write his own name. The investigation also uncovered something Vera hadn't known: complaints from other teachers. Over the years, at least 6 teachers had expressed concerns about Buckwald's methods to administrators. All 6 had been told to mind their own business. 3 of them had later left the profession entirely. One of those teachers, Grace Pembleton, testified before the committee. She was 61 now, long retired, but her memories were sharp. Grace said. Grace's voice hardened. I went to the principal in 1937. I told him what I was seeing. I told him these children were traumatized. You know what he said? They're learning discipline. You could learn something from Mrs. Buckwald's methods. Your students are too undisciplined. That was the last time I said anything. I kept my head down, kept teaching, and I've regretted my silence every day since. On April 10, 1949, the board issued its findings. Mrs. Opal Thornbury Buckwald was to be terminated immediately. She would lose her teaching license. Her awards and commendations would be revoked. Her name would be removed from all school honors. The report, released to the public, was devastating. It detailed decades of abuse. It named names. It included testimonies from hundreds of victims. It documented the administrative complicity that had allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. The superintendent was forced to resign. Principal Wardell, though retired, had his pension benefits investigated. Several other administrators faced disciplinary action for failing to act on reports of abuse. But the damage was done. Hundreds of lives had been affected, and no punishment, no public humiliation, no official condemnation could undo that. Mrs. Buckwald fought the decision. She hired a lawyer. She filed an appeal. She gave interviews claiming she was being persecuted for maintaining high standards. She said the new generation was too soft, too weak, too coddled. She called Vera Caldwell a troublemaker and a radical feminist who wanted to destroy traditional education. But the evidence was overwhelming. The appeal was denied. Mrs. Buckwald was finished. She moved away from Pittsburgh in the summer of 1949. Vera heard she went to Ohio, then Michigan. She tried to get teaching positions in other districts, but word had spread. No one would hire her. She lived her final years in a nursing home in Cleveland. She never admitted wrongdoing. She never apologized. She died in 1967 at age 81, bitter and alone, convinced she'd been betrayed by a system that no longer valued excellence. But for Vera, the work was just beginning. Removing one abusive teacher didn't fix the system that had protected her for decades. It didn't heal the hundreds of children she'd harmed. It didn't prevent other teachers like her from continuing to work. In the immediate aftermath of Buckwald's termination, Vera received letters, hundreds of them, from across Pennsylvania, from Ohio, from New York, from as far away as California. Parents writing to say, "This is happening at my child's school too." Teachers writing to say, "I've seen this. I didn't know what to do." Former students writing to say, "Thank you for believing us." One letter from a mother in Philadelphia read, "My son had a teacher just like Mrs. Buckwald, Miss Thornton. She terrorized children for 20 years before she retired. My son is 30 now and still can't hold a job, still has panic attacks, still believes he's worthless. I wish someone had stopped her the way you stopped Buckwald. Another from a teacher in Cleveland. I work with a woman who uses the same methods: humiliation, fear, punishment. I've reported her to the principal 3 times. Each time I'm told she's old school and gets results. What can I do? Vera realized the problem was far bigger than one teacher, one school, one district. It was systemic. It was cultural. It was a fundamental belief that children needed to be controlled, dominated, broken into submission in order to learn. She began traveling, giving talks to parent groups, teacher associations, school boards. She spoke at universities, at conferences, at anyone who would listen. Her message was simple but radical for its time. Psychological abuse is abuse. It causes real harm. It must be stopped. The resistance was fierce. Many educators saw her as a threat to traditional values. They argued that discipline was necessary, that children needed strict boundaries, that coddling would produce weak adults unable to handle the real world. One superintendent at a conference in 1951 stood up during Vera's presentation and said, quote, 210. Vera looked him in the eye and replied, quote, 211. But slowly, gradually, things began to change. The publicity around the Buckwald case had opened a door. Other victims came forward. Other abusive teachers were investigated. School districts began implementing policies to protect children. In 1952, Pennsylvania passed the first state law requiring schools to have formal procedures for investigating complaints of teacher misconduct. It wasn't perfect. Enforcement was weak. Loopholes were large. But it was a start. In 1955, Vera was hired as a consultant by the U.S. Department of Education to develop guidelines for identifying and preventing psychological abuse in schools. She worked with a team of psychologists, educators, and child welfare advocates to create a comprehensive framework. The guidelines, published in 1957, defined psychological abuse and outlined warning signs: humiliation, excessive punishment, withholding of affection or approval, isolation, threats, intimidation. They provided protocols for reporting and investigating complaints. They mandated that teachers receive training in child development and age-appropriate discipline. Many districts ignored the guidelines. They were recommendations, not requirements. But some adopted them. And in those schools, things got better. Teachers learned new methods. Children were treated with more respect. The culture slowly shifted. Vera also worked directly with victims. She established support groups for adults who'd experienced childhood educational trauma. These groups met in church basements, community centers, anywhere that would have them. Adults who'd been told they were stupid, defective, failures, they came together and discovered they weren't alone. One woman, Martha, had been in Buckwald's class in 1934. She attended Vera's support group in 1956 at age 29. Martha said at her first meeting, by the end of the first year, Martha had enrolled in night school. By 1960, she'd earned her high school diploma. By 1963, she was working as a secretary at a law firm. She never became a lawyer herself. The years of believing she was stupid had taken their toll. But she'd broken free of the worst of it. She'd reclaimed some of what Buckwald had stolen. Not everyone recovered. Vera's support groups also saw the ones who couldn't heal, the ones whose damage ran too deep, the ones who turned to alcohol, to drugs, to anything that would numb the pain. She remembered Richard, who'd been in Buckwald's class in 1936. He came to the support group drunk, week after week. I can't stop drinking, he said. When I'm sober, all I hear is her voice, telling me I'm worthless, telling me I'm nothing. The alcohol makes it stop. Richard died in 1959 at age 30, liver failure. He was one of many. In 1965, Vera published her landmark work, The Buckwald Case: How One Teacher Destroyed Hundreds of Lives. The book was more than just a recounting of events. It was an analysis of systemic failure. It examined how institutions protect abusers, how authority figures exploit power imbalances, how societies normalize cruelty when it's cloaked in respectability. The book sold modestly at first, but over time it became a touchstone. By the 1970s, it was required reading in teacher training programs across the country. By the 1980s, it had been translated into 7 languages. By the 1990s, it was considered a classic in the field of educational psychology. But more importantly, it changed conversations. Teachers who'd been using fear-based methods started questioning them. Parents who'd accepted that schools should be unpleasant started demanding better. Administrators who'd protected abusive teachers started facing consequences. The change was slow, painfully slow. In 1970, Vera visited a school in rural Pennsylvania and observed a teacher berating a child for 20 minutes straight. The child was crying, shaking, clearly terrified. When Vera reported it, the principal said, "That's just how Miss Henderson is. She's been teaching here for 30 years. Vera wanted to scream. Instead, she wrote letters to the school board, to the state education department, to the local newspaper. She kept writing until Miss Henderson was investigated, until she was removed from the classroom, until that one child, at least, was safe. But she knew there were thousands more Miss Hendersons out there, thousands of children suffering in silence, and she couldn't save them all. In 1978, Vera testified before Congress in support of legislation to establish federal standards for teacher conduct and student safety. The legislation didn't pass. States' rights advocates blocked it. But her testimony was entered into the congressional record. It became part of the official historical documentation of education reform efforts. Quote 218, quote, she told the committee. Quote 219, quote 220, quote. Vera Caldwell retired in 1980 at age 57. She tracked the fates of Mrs. Buckwald's former students. Of the 327 she was able to locate, the statistics were grim. Many struggled with mental health issues throughout their lives. Many turned to alcohol or drugs to cope with their trauma. Some were never able to hold steady jobs or form healthy relationships. The psychological damage inflicted in those early years rippled through their entire lives. She compiled detailed case studies, with permission from those willing to share their stories. Case Study 1. Eugene Trask, class of 1935 to 1939. Eugene struggled with depression his entire life. He never married, never had children. After the steel mill closed in 1975, he drifted through odd jobs: night watchman, janitor, dishwasher. He couldn't hold any position for more than a few months. His supervisors always said the same thing. Quote, 2, 2, 1. The slightest correction would send Eugene into a spiral of anxiety and self-doubt. In 1980, Vera visited him at the boarding house where he lived. He was 52 but looked 70. Thin, gray, defeated. Quote, 222, he told her. Quote, 223. He died in 1982 at age 54. Heart attack, the official cause. But Vera knew it was a lifetime of stress, of never feeling safe, of carrying the weight of Buckwald's words for 47 years. Case Study 2. Hazel Pendergast, class of 1935 to 1939. Hazel, who'd stopped speaking for 2 years after first grade, eventually regained her voice. But she never fully recovered her confidence. She worked as a seamstress, a job that required minimal interaction with others. She never married. When Vera interviewed her in 1975 at age 47, Hazel still spoke in barely more than a whisper. Hazel said. Hazel died in 1998 at age 70. She'd lived her entire adult life in the same small apartment, rarely leaving except for work and groceries. Her neighbors barely knew her name. Case Study 3. Vincent Scragg, class of 1935 to 1939. Vincent, who'd started hitting his head against walls as a child, spent most of his adult life in and out of psychiatric institutions. The self-harm behavior never fully stopped. As an adult, he'd bang his head against walls during episodes of severe stress. The doctors tried medications, therapy, everything available at the time. Nothing worked. In 1970, during one of his stays at Western State Hospital, a psychiatrist wrote in his file, "Patient exhibits behaviors consistent with severe childhood trauma. Patient states trauma originated in first grade with a teacher named Buckwald. Patient's entire psychiatric history may stem from this early experience." Vincent died in a state hospital in 1995, at age 67. He'd spent more years institutionalized than free. Case Study 4. Margaret Hollis, class of 1931 to 1935. Margaret, the daughter of Polish immigrants, never learned to read fluently. She worked as a telephone operator until automation made her job obsolete in 1965. After that, she struggled to find work. Most jobs required at least basic reading skills. She applied for a position at a grocery store in 1967. The application form asked her to read a short passage and answer questions. She couldn't do it. The manager, embarrassed for her, said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this position requires literacy." Margaret went home and cried for hours. She was 42 years old, intelligent, capable, but Buckwald had destroyed her ability to learn to read. And in a world that increasingly required literacy, she was left behind. She lived on disability payments until her death in 2001, at age 76. She never married, never had children, never owned a home. She lived her entire adult life in her childhood bedroom in her parents' house. Case Study 5. Robert Kelso, class of 1926 to 1930. Robert, the war veteran, managed better than most. He'd found structure and purpose in the military. The trauma of combat paradoxically helped. It gave him something worse to compare his childhood to. But he never fully escaped. He drank heavily. He had violent nightmares. His wife left him in 1955, taking their 2 children. She wrote in the divorce filing, "Robert is a good man, but he cannot control his anger. He yells at the children for minor mistakes. He demands perfection. He's terrifying them the way he was terrified." When Vera interviewed him in 1978, Robert was 60 years old and sober 3 years. He joined AA, found a sponsor, started to heal. But the damage to his relationships was permanent. His children, now adults, barely spoke to him. Robert said, tears in his eyes. Robert died in 1991, at age 73. His children came to the funeral. They forgave him, they said, but the relationship had never fully healed. Case Study 6. Nadine Pemberton, class of 1948 to 1949. Nadine was one of the success stories, if any of Buckwald's students could be called that. Removed from Buckwald's class after just 1 year, she transferred to a school with a gentle, nurturing teacher. She received therapy throughout her childhood. Her mother, Iris, was vigilant about her mental health, never dismissive of her struggles. Nadine grew up to become a social worker specializing in child protective services. She spent her career advocating for abused children, giving them the protection she'd needed and received. But even Nadine bore scars. She counted compulsively her entire life, steps, breaths, bites of food. She had panic attacks triggered by loud noises. She was hypersensitive to criticism, always afraid she wasn't good enough. __quote _232 ___. Nadine told Vera in 2000, when they met for coffee on the 51st anniversary of Buckwald's firing. Nadine was 59 then, Vera 77. But I wonder who I would have been if I'd never met her. Would I still count everything? Would I still wake up from nightmares about failure chairs and dark closets? Would I still hear her voice sometimes, telling me I'm sloppy and stupid? I built a good life. I helped a lot of kids, but I had to build it on top of rubble. And sometimes I'm so tired of building. Sally Parsons never got the chance to recover. She was buried in Allegheny Cemetery in 1944, 16 years old, another casualty of a system that valued discipline over compassion. Her death had happened 4 years before Vera's investigation even began, one of many tragedies that might have been prevented if someone had acted sooner. Vera Caldwell retired in 1980 at age 57. She was tired. 32 years of fighting, of battling institutions, of trying to protect children from adults who should have protected them. She lived in a small apartment in Pittsburgh's Oakland neighborhood. Sometimes former students visited her, those who'd survived, who'd managed to build lives despite their trauma. They thanked her. They told her she'd saved them. But Vera always thought about the ones she hadn't saved, the ones who hadn't made it. The dozens whose lives had been irreparably damaged before anyone understood what was happening. In 1995, at age 72, Vera gave her final interview. The reporter asked, quote, 235. Vera was silent for a long time. Then she said, quote, 236. Quote, 237. The reporter asked, quote, 238. Vera answered simply. Vera looked out the window. Outside, children were playing in the park, laughing, carefree. Vera shook her head. The interview was published. __quote _244 __. The interview was published in a pedagogical journal. It was read by thousands of teachers. Some agreed. Some were outraged. Some said nothing. But the important thing, it was read. And perhaps at least a few teachers reconsidered their methods. Perhaps at least one child avoided the fate of Buckwald's students. Vera Caldwell died in 2002 at age 79. Her obituary ran in papers across the country. Pioneer child psychologist dies. Advocate who exposed teacher abuse passes away. Vera Caldwell, champion of children, 1923 to 2002. Hundreds attended her funeral. Colleagues, students, friends, and, most importantly, the survivors. Former students of Mrs. Buckwald who'd built lives despite their trauma. Nadine Pemberton, now 61, spoke at the service. __quote _248 __. Vera was buried in Homewood Cemetery. Her headstone reads, __quote _249 __, at Washington Elementary School number 28, where Mrs. Buckwald's name once hung on a plaque of honor. There is now a different plaque. It reads, in memory of the children who suffered abuse in our educational system, may we do better. It doesn't bring back their childhoods. It doesn't undo the damage, but it's a reminder. For teachers, for parents, for everyone who works with children, a child is not material to be shaped. A child is a human being, small, vulnerable, trusting. And we, the adults, are responsible for their well-being, their mental health, their future. Mrs. Buckwald believed she was building strong people by breaking weak ones. But she was wrong. She didn't build, she destroyed. She didn't strengthen, she crushed. She didn't educate, she traumatized. And the fact that she did it sincerely believing in the righteousness of her methods doesn't excuse her. It makes her more dangerous, because the most dangerous abuser is the one who believes they're a savior. The system has changed since 1949, slowly, imperfectly, but it has changed. Today, there are laws protecting children from psychological abuse. There are mandatory reporting requirements. There are psychologists in schools. There are support systems. But the work is never finished. Because as long as there are adults who believe that fear is an acceptable teaching tool, that humiliation builds character, that breaking a child's spirit is the price of academic achievement, there will be new Buckwalds. Perhaps more subtle, perhaps more careful, but still there. Vera Caldwell spent her life fighting that belief. She didn't win every battle. She couldn't save every child. But she changed the conversation. She made it possible to say, "This is wrong. This is abuse. This must stop." And that small shift in awareness, that opening of eyes, that willingness to question authority and protect the vulnerable, that is her legacy. Not a perfect system, not a world without cruelty, but a world where at least some people are willing to stand up and say, "No, not to my children, not on my watch." And sometimes, that's enough to save a life.